introduce myself. I'm Jim Gustafson, professor of psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin Medical School, giving my 19th of 36 lectures. Today's lecture is called The Lifeline, Everyone's Myth of Being a Hero. Winnicott simply means by the word lifeline, that the child's faith in going forward into the world from his or her mother depends upon identifying with an adult who is more than admired, but more like taken as a model. Wright gives an example of a boy who was very affected in his style and as an adult, and Wright couldn't figure out what was going on with this guy, and he found out that this guy's uncle, his maternal uncle, was an English lord. And so this was his lifeline, to act like his uncle. Right? When this faith is shattered, when acting like an English lord, gets you in trouble, which you can imagine, and is shattered. When that faith is shattered and the lifeline collapses, which is what we were talking about this morning with our patient, the boy or girl is in terror of being totally disoriented about what is good to open up to and what is evil to close to. The trouble with these psychoanalytic theories and practices is that they are good. Yes, I did contradict myself. Sometimes extremely good, as in Winnicott, best in the world, really. But they leave out something. They leave out, they're very intrapsychic. They leave aside what's going on in the world, which is decisive for what goes on inside of the child. For after all, how the child plays himself or herself into the world depends very much on the world and whether the child has an accurate map of the world. If not, terrible. Freud, strangely, usually psychoanalysts have used the word myth rather than lifeline for what the child has faith in. Freud strangely said that there's only one important myth, Oedipus myth. Strange idea. If you think about it, Jung was outraged by this and said, there's a huge set of myths in Western culture available to the child to borrow. Joseph Campbell put Jung's argument even more forcefully in the title of his most important book in 1949, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. You probably saw Bill Moyers interview Joseph Campbell. Great videos. Clearly, the myth that a child makes his or her own lifeline has its sources in more than one identification. So Reich is not entirely right. Usually a child will pull together a dream, there's that word, Dominic, of him or herself, like that patient this morning. That is a composite of many individuals. You know that from your own experience. There's probably many people that you admired as a child. So art, sport, nature, philosophy, the family, the church, the school, and so forth. Mike Moran and I were talking about this, that all of those places you might build on your conception. In fact, this composite myth about yourself is in continuous development and still is in continuous development, even at my age. Now I'm almost 30, and I'm still developing. And that means adding and subtracting from your own conception. When things go wrong, you have to say, this part of my myth is not right. We were doing that yesterday. We were talking about that. And then adding something else that's more accurate. Right? What is of greatest importance, and this is where we get to the center of this lecture, is that this complex of possibilities, that's you and your map, your myth, entertained by the child for him or herself, has to withstand shocks to its accuracy, to its hopes. When it seems to be wrong about what is actually possible for him or her in the world, like our patient, all of a sudden didn't have an identity when her daughter grew up. She was lost. Her lifeline had collapsed. That's a very serious loss of faith. Today we will take as a case example one of my most challenging cases of this, namely myself, for which this patient said one needs chutzpah to give a lecture like that. But, Freud did that all the time. He was always using himself as an example. So I see that's part of my myth, is I can act like Freud. And I can even criticize him and say, isn't he foolish for only having one myth? And I can, so on. I can have fun, right? And still be a doctor. Strange. Yeah. Now in lecture 17, I used the notion that, and a dream, the last lecture 18, that dream can have elements that are so condensed, as Freud would say. There's so much condensed into an image that it works like a Chinese ideogram, like a Chinese character. And it provides an extremely shorthand for things that are enormously big. And that's why I'm using this case of myself, because I know myself quite well, and this is a dream that I had that was a big dream. I think I dreamt it because I needed to think about it. And it's on the world scale. So here's the dream. I dream I am to ride in a dune buggy with huge lopsided tires, so much bigger on the right side than on the left side. On the right side always means the conscious part of the mind, right? And the left side always means the unconscious, almost always. So this is a dune buggy that's very conscious, but unconsciously it's not too well equipped. Speaking of my father. And so I'm dread riding in this unbalanced dune buggy, and I'm thinking, this is going to fall over. Now you can look at the diagram now. Yeah, let's go. So the first image there, I put a 1 above it. You see that dune buggy that's lopsided on the right side? Now I'm going to tell you about what's connected to this dune buggy, which is a separate image, but you see here's a second ideogram. So I noticed that the first thing I thought, oh, well, that looks precarious, right? That dune buggy. And then I look at this dune, I say, what's this? It's pulling. My God. It was pulling a house with a sheet wrapped around the waist of the house. And the house was standing on a mat. In other words, the house is like a human being. It has a sheet around itself. It's acting like a human being, and the house is standing on a mat, right? And I thought, what? Oh, what? So here's this, and I remembered what it was. You probably never have seen bull racing in Pakistan, in rural Pakistan. And that's what they do. They'll get a wild bull. They'll put a rope around it and around the guy that's going to race on it. He stands barefoot on a map, and then they take off, right? All right. So Ed, if you haven't come back to me, we'll come back to me. We'll get to the third image. Now I will talk about this. Trouble, huh? So these two ideograms then work like a line of poetry in Japanese, in Chinese, and they become a single pulse. And I knew fairly quickly how these two images went together. The dune buggy refers to a vacation that we took when I was about 12 to the Sleeping Bear Dunes up near Traverse City in Michigan. My father was a devotee of the auto industry in various aspects, which was, I didn't have any faith in that. And he took us on one of these dune buggy rides over the dunes. My mother and I and my brother, and he drove the damn thing. And I hadn't thought of this experience for 60 years. I mean, this just occurred in a dream. I haven't literally, and my unconscious called up this image of the situation as pertinent to the present. You see, that's how a dream will, what resonates from the past in the present will come up in a dream as an image. I had never before At the time, I don't remember feeling scared about it, actually. I thought, well, what an adventure. But now when I looked at it, I thought, my God, what a thing to do. When all it would take is one flip, the way tractors in Wisconsin, go flippo, and the person, dies under the tractor, right? It was a setup, actually, of foolishness. So as for the house pulled in a white sheet, very unusual to see houses pulled behind dune buggies with a white sheet around their waist. Have you ever seen that? No. Now you have. Now you've seen it. I have many associations all converging on the same point, where the natural pulse of this essentially nightmare has its full impact. One is a story by Faulkner called Barn Burning, where the boy, about 12, my age in this dream, has captive of his father, who has this insane rage. He's a poor white guy in the South, and he's determined to burn down the plantation of this guy that throws him off the property, and the boy's with his father. A difficult place for a son to be, right? Second story is a story by D.H. Lawrence called The Rocking Horse Winner, which is the same thing with a mother. There's a boy, also about 12, maybe younger, whose mother has a mania for money, and the father doesn't make very much money. And the boy concocts this idea riding on his rocking horse, which is when riding wildly on his rocking horse, he can guess the name of the next horse that will win, in the local horse place. And he and the family groom then run off to the horse race, and the boy tells them who to bet on, and supposedly that he's going to save the family. Now, in just this way, I feel the terror of my family's dependence upon my father in the treacherous business of selling automobiles. See? Now, here we come to the third ideogram. I depend upon my mother. Oh my God, I'm having too much fun. I better finish this lecture. I depend upon my mother in her womb with her lifeline to me of the umbilical cord, of course. And then, of course, like all of us, I fall from, as in the famous poem of Randall Jarrell, the Ballad of the Ball Turd Gunner, from my mother's womb, I fell into the state. And I hunched in its belly till my wet fur froze. 6 miles from earth, loosed from its stream of life, I woke to black flak and the nightmare fighters. So going from your mother's womb to depending on someone like some of our fathers can be terrorizing to your lifeline. So here's the resolution of all. I never put you in trouble without getting you out of it. So here's the third dream. This eventually turned into my profession, which is Stuart and I have been talking. I'm basically turning psychiatry into obstetrics. I'm teaching people how to deliver themselves, from their own systems that are inaccurate, from their own myths that are inaccurate, right, or no longer accurate. So here was the dream, and you can look. Let's go into the third diagram. This was a wonderful addition to our department, Paul. It's part of the IT department of our department, and this is that we have this computer device by which has a little fish, in it that is on the screen, and it's in tune. All of our patients, we can look at the state of their little fish. You see that they're carrying around inside of them electronically. So it's kind of a, and it also will know, we can tell, we don't even have to see the patients anymore. because we just look on the computer and we see when the little fish is ready to be delivered, and then we take our trunk of forceps, which we keep secret, right? Like the Chamberlain family did for 100 years. The forceps was unknown for 100 years because this family kept them in a trunk, and then they would show up to deliveries that no one else could do, and they'd cover up the woman with a sheet, and then they would take out their forceps and they would deliver the patient. Well, I'm imagining this is what the department's going to be like, you see. So you see how you see how hilarious this is, because instead of depending on a father in the automobile industry, I've reconceived of my myth as being an obstetrician, right, in psychiatry. I become a doctor who delivers what is beautiful into reading what is accurate for him or her in the world. That's my job. So in other words, here is the summary of the demonstration made in these 3 ideograms. You see how they work together. The first 2 pose the nightmare, propose the captivity, right? That one might be in a position in danger of losing one's lifeline, as of the first 2 diagrams, and of course I was. That put me in peril. That was what we were depending on. You see. And I had to then revise my myth, so I had a line of work that was sounder, you see. And probably you'll have to do that too. So, now the last couple, my God, I'm having way too much fun. All right. I indulged myself once in a while. All right, now, Ed, don't worry, I'm about to finish. I was confirmed in the First Congregational Church in Saginaw, Michigan on June 11th, 1950. I was still 8 years old. And I had to recite the 23rd Psalm by heart. It says so on the presentation page of my Bible, which I have on my desk, right? And it says, it gives the first verse of the 23rd Psalm is, Jehovah is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I could give you all the rest of the lines, but I won't. In other words, I'll be a good boy, and my covenant is Jehovah will spread a table for me in the presence of mine enemies and anoint my head with oil. And that's also, you see, part of my myth from very early, that there was a father one could have faith in, you see. But such a child's faith will not suffice forever, because at some point, if you have that faith, things will go absolutely wrong. This 22nd Psalm is incredible. The first line, you probably don't know it. It is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? So the entire history of the Old Testament and the New Testament turns on these 2 opposite lines. Verse 1 of the 23rd and verse 1 of the 22nd. Those who are ready for both lines of sight, have a much sturdier faith. Thank you.